Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon, and on today, July 3rd, 2018, I'm talking to the editor-in-chief of Disobedient Media, Elizabeth Lea Vos, about the immunity deal for Julian Assange that was reportedly scuttled by James Comey and Mark Warner in the spring of 2017. Hi, Elizabeth. It's great to meet you, and welcome to Around the Empire.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So the news of this immunity deal for Julian Assange, and today happens to be his birthday. I wish that he wasn't cut off from the rest of the world, which he has been for about 100 days now. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm really glad that even though I know this broadcast won't be, streamed on his birthday, we are actually speaking on his birthday at the moment, and that's really, it's something to remember as we go through this discussion for sure.
Right. I definitely sympathize with that, and I have joined in on yours and Susie Dawson's vigil live streams. I've watched some of those. You really did an amazing job with that. Yeah, I mean, I hope that people are keeping that in mind. I can't imagine what it's like to have no contact with your loved ones, your friends, and the internet and all that. And
Absolutely.
I don't understand it.
Yeah, and we will be having another vigil very shortly. It will be on the 6th to the 8th is the next vigil, and I know that Susie's already gearing up and in the midst of organizing that. Basically, it's really unfortunate that we have to do these vigils at all, like in having to plan for the next one because he hasn't been reconnected to the world yet. But as long as that's the case, we're going to do, monthly vigils to bring people, supporters of his from around the world together, no matter what political persuasion they're from, in order to really raise our voices continually. And at first, we had planned to do, like a one-off massive vigil and have it last for a week or something. That's what we planned. But then we realized, well, we can't just do one big event and then it's over. That's too easy for those that want to silence Julian. So we decided to break it up and continue it as long as is necessary. But
yeah, I think that's a good idea because, people get caught up in things. The news cycles are crazy. It's like drinking from a fire hose, and it's summer and there's the World Cup and there's all kinds of other things, and it's easy to forget. So yeah, I think the periodic reminders are a good idea too. And for anybody who's not familiar with this, Susie Dawson and Elizabeth Lea Vos, you can find them on Twitter. And is there going to be a specific hashtag?
Yeah, the very first vigil we had was the hashtag Reconnect Julian. That was literally thrown together on the day that we heard on March 28th this year when we heard that he had been cut off. And I mean, within hours, Susie and Kim.com had thrown a vigil together. But the ongoing vigils that we have, they go by under the banner hashtag Unity4J. So like the word unity, the number 4, and then the letter J. And so, yeah, the periodic, like the planned monthly vigils go by that hashtag.
Okay, so keep an eye out for that for anyone who's interested. And they're really good, by the way. There's some really awesome guests and the whole thing. Yeah, it never gets boring. It's very good. So this immunity deal, we just found out, like just last week, John Solomon, who's an investigative journalist, published kind of a bombshell article in The Hill that got a lot of attention in social media. I don't think it got that much attention in mainstream media, though. We're not surprised about that. I put together just a little table of who the players are in this article because it's not a long article, but it has a lot of information in it.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, and a little timeline. So I think I'll just quickly go through that just to give out the basics to our listeners. So the people involved in this case are obviously Julian Assange, John Solomon, an investigative journalist, and he has had some pretty big stories in the past, and he's also an executive vice president for video for The Hill. Then there's Adam Waldman, and interestingly, in the article, he describes Adam Waldman. He says he, quote, has a Forrest Gump-like penchant for showing up in major cases of intrigue.
I noticed that. That was a really great way to describe it.
Yeah. So he's an American attorney. He's a former DOJ official in the Clinton administration. And he is he's acting as Assange's lawyer, pro bono lawyer in this case. Although I don't think he has before, I'm not sure, but he had connections to the government, and I believe they decided he was a good go-between, and Waldman decided to do this. And then we have Senator Mark Warner. He's the senator from Virginia, and he's a Democrat. He's also the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's a consummate insider in the Democratic establishment, and he was a governor before that. And before that, he had an illustrious career in telecom and technology. I think he happens to be the wealthiest senator in the United States Senate, for whatever that's worth. And then we have James Comey, who was the current FBI director at the time. He has since been fired, as we all know, in May of 2017, not too long after this happened, though I doubt it was related. And then David Laufman, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this, but it's Laufman, and he is a DOJ official, DOJ being Department of Justice, and he's the counterintelligence section chief, so he's pretty high up there. And then we have Bruce Orr, a name that you've probably come across before, another DOJ official. Now, I don't think he is anymore, though. He was the DOJ contact for Christopher Steele, and his wife worked for Fusion GPS. He's quite an interesting character in this whole Russiagate quagmire. So those are the people involved mainly. And can you think of anyone else who's relevant we should bring up
No,
for
that
this?
about sums it up, I think.
Yeah. So the timeline is that in January of 2017, and this would be just before Trump is inaugurated, I guess. There's a quote from the article, quote, Assange's legal team approached Waldman, known for his government connections, to see if the new Trump administration would negotiate with the Wikileaks founder, unquote. And so in January 2017, Waldman met with Assange 3 times in London. And he also contacted Bruce Orr, and he met with Bruce Orr by the beginning of, it looks like it took him a couple weeks to make that happen. But then on February 3rd, 2017, he met with Bruce Orr. And then Orr immediately contacted David Laufman, his colleague, and Laufman wanted to set up a conference call immediately. We know this from documents, by the way, text messages and documents that the journalist John Solomon got. I'm not sure if he got them from Adam Waldman. I think maybe he did. He definitely quotes Adam Waldman, so he is speaking to him in this article. Does Solomon say how he got onto this story? I don't think he does.
I don't think he does. He mentions having multiple sources that informed him of this, but as to who exactly those were, I don't think he specifies.
Right. So Laufman jumps right on it. He wants to have a conference call that night, he says. It's a Friday night, to hear what Assange was offering. And then the next day, WikiLeaks started releasing, if you remember on Twitter, on the 4th of February, early February, WikiLeaks started releasing these cryptic messages and photos.
Yes, I remember that.
About Vault 7, which I remember being very curious about that because I hadn't really remembered WikiLeaks doing something like this before. And I don't remember how many there were, but there was a series of them. It was like a countdown. And it was a big deal, and everyone was waiting for these Vault 7 drops that were to come. And I think it's interesting that with the timing of WikiLeaks, starts to release these impending dump messages about Vault 7 while his negotiations are just really starting to ramp up, almost like giving them an incentive to move on this. But
definitely,
that's my own interpretation. I don't know what their intention was. Obviously, I'm not inside their heads. And then we have, in the middle of February, Waldman reaches out to Mark Warner. And the article mentions that Waldman wonders if Mark Warner, being on the Senate Intelligence Committee, might want to speak with Assange and, get some information. Is that because this is one of the big questions for me, is why Waldman got Warner involved in the first place.
I'm not sure that the documents and the article that Solomon has written really gives us that reason. I don't see one. I mean, we can speculate, but I don't think that that's something that we can tell just from the information available here.
Yeah. The only thing he mentions is that he reached out to Senator Warner, them quoting from the article. The lawyer wanted to see if Senate Intelligence Committee staff wanted any contact with Assange to ask about Russia or other issues.
Yeah, and see
Okay,
that's
so
that's the key element of this, I think, is that from my perspective, the way that I see this is that it wouldn't have been so much that Comey would have wanted to shut down negotiations just due to the whole Vault 7 issue. And I know that a lot of other people feel this way too, that it would have been to prevent Assange providing some sort of indication or evidence that Russia did not interfere with the elections, et cetera, et cetera. So,
right, which
yeah.
he's offering to. I feel the same way, which he's offering to do. At this point, he's not. It's not only is he offering or maybe agreeing to redact some names or cooperate in the process of releasing the Vault 7, but he says that he will help them with technical information about who didn't. He wouldn't reveal the source, but about who didn't
Yeah,
provide the emails to
exactly.
him.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is the fateful action is when Waldman reaches out to Warner and he tells him about the negotiations. And then Warner basically says, hold on, I've got an important message about your call. And then he later told Waldman that James Comey told him to stand down, cut off the negotiations with Assange. And interestingly, the article also mentions that the FBI counterintelligence was already involved. They already knew about these negotiations. So Comey's underlings knew that this was happening, but Comey uses Warner to shut these down. Now, we don't have any quotes from Warner. We only have from Comey. We don't have any quotes from Comey. We only have Warner saying that Comey is the one who told him to stand down to cut off these negotiations with Assange. But I guess here Solomon's thorough, and he gets another source to confirm. Yeah, it was Comey who did this. And then another interesting thing about it is that Waldman told Laufman, the DOJ side of this potential deal, and Laufman supposedly contradicted Comey and said, oh no, we're not standing down. We're going to continue. But here's where it gets a little fuzzy. A couple of weeks after that, WikiLeaks releases the first tranche of Vault 7. And so we're now at March 7th, 2017. And these are CIA hacking tools. It's a very important data dump. It's devastating.
I think it's interesting, though, that despite the fact that the negotiations ultimately were unsuccessful, WikiLeaks still did. They withheld the actual information that would have made this dangerous, as in would have given every high school amateur hacker the ability to use these tools. So I think that the fact that they did that is really important to remember that even though these negotiations didn't ultimately go through, they were still extremely responsible in the way that they published this, and I think they deserve credit for that. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, they the way that they published it was not so much, they did not censor it, of course, but they didn't publish the information as far as I'm aware. And I may be misspeaking here because I'm very much not technical myself, but the way I understand it is they there was some parts of information that they did not publish with like the various like Marble framework, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that would have allowed every amateur hacker that wanted to actually use these tools. They published it in a way that wouldn't allow that to happen. And please fact check me on that, because if I said it incorrectly, then please correct me afterwards. But I think that it was that's the way that I understood they published it, and I thought that was interesting. That when that happened, the press did not report on that almost at all. How careful they were.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. And it'll become relevant again later in this timeline here. So that's the 7th of March, and WikiLeaks releases the first tranche of Vault 7. There's multiple batches of information that they're sending out. And then on the 28th of March, so they're still going along. This doesn't scuttle the whole thing.
The way Solomon words it is that the March 7 release was when the negotiations were warming up. So it seems as if the actual interruption or the end of those negotiations happened more towards April. At least that's the way I understood his article.
Yeah.
So,
The way that I reported it is really, it's just a note I put in there for myself. He later told Waldman that Comey told him to stand down. So in the middle of February, obviously he hasn't passed on this stand down message at all yet. So we're still in March, and the negotiations are still going on, and they're seem fruitful, and it results in a proffer, a quote unquote queen for a day proffer for Assange, which is an immunity deal that it allows him to leave the embassy and to, we still don't know exactly what that deal was, but it allows him to talk to U.S. officials without them, hauling him off to extradite him or whatever to jail. And we have the text of that. I don't. It's a lot of legalese. I don't know if we should read that or not, but do you think should I go into the details of that? Should I read it real quick or?
sure, why not?
Yeah, let me just pull that up real quick. Here's March 28th. Okay, so this looks like an email to David Laufman from Adam Waldman. He says, "Dear David, subject to adequate and binding protections, including but not limited to acceptable written immunity and safe passage agreement, Mr. Assange welcomes the opportunity to discuss with the U.S. government risk mitigation approaches relating to CIA documents in WikiLeaks possession or control, such as the redaction of agency personnel in hostile jurisdictions and foreign espionage risks to WikiLeaks staff. Derived directly from this discussion of risk mitigation, Mr. Assange is also prepared to discuss, within the source protection boundaries expected of a journalist and publisher operating at the highest level integrity, 1. A description of CIA information in the possession or control of WikiLeaks. 2. The risks of third parties who may have obtained access to such information. Notwithstanding the foregoing or avoidance of doubt, this category specifically, and others generally, will not include any information that may affect WikiLeaks' obligations to protect its sources. And yes, that's 3, information regarding the timing of further publications insofar as they relate to the risk mitigation approaches developed. I look forward to discussing at your convenience. Kind regards, Adam." So this is the meat of the investigation. I'm sorry, the negotiations here. Then the next thing that happens is about a week after that, we have an email from Laufman to Waldman asking for clarification of what safe passage meant. They're just trying to figure out whether that means, he can just leave the embassy to have this meeting, or whether he's looking, to get to an airport. Or he says, Mr. Assange you indicate that Mr. Assange is seeking a safe passage agreement. What kind of safe passage is he asking for? The ability to return to the embassy after meeting elsewhere in London, if such a meeting can be arranged, or something else. 2 days later, WikiLeaks releases another Vault 7 on CIA malware, and the DOJ backed out of the negotiations. So I may have forgotten to put in here the most important thing, which is when this stand down thing takes hold. Obviously, it happens in early April, right?
Yeah.
And WikiLeaks becomes suspicious of the whole deal. He feels he's being, undermined. And then he goes ahead with that more important tranche, or more damaging tranche.
Yeah, he just says early April, Loughlin
Yeah.
wrote Waldman in early April, and then by April 7, it looks like it was pretty much over. I just wanted to add that I've looked up the WikiLeaks press release on Vault 7. I just want to clarify because I was right, but I want to actually read to you guys what they say about having kind of prevented the weaponization of the information they published, because I think it relates to kind of the fact that even though these negotiations did not ultimately succeed, they still were very responsible in the way that they published this. So WikiLeaks said in their press release that WikiLeaks has carefully reviewed the year zero disclosure and published substantive CIA documentation while avoiding the distribution of, quote, armed cyber weapons until a consensus emerges on the technical and political nature of the CIA's program and how such weapons should be analyzed, disarmed, and published. And then they go on to say that they've redacted some identifying information for in-depth analysis. The redactions include tens of thousands of CIA targets and attack machines throughout Latin America, Europe, and the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to say that because I think it relates very much to how careful WikiLeaks is, even though they are publishing this massive amount of information, because the press often will falsely accuse WikiLeaks of putting agents in danger, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's important to counter that false reporting. So,
Okay, that's good. I think it also indicates, and this is my opinion, that they're still hoping that maybe these negotiations can be brought up either with the same people or different people, or they still hope, that, and, frankly, what other option does Assange have? He doesn't have a lot of options at this point. And we do have evidence that later on he is still trying to work out some kind of a deal with the US government. But you also have to take into consideration that this is a chaotic period of time here in the States. This is the first few months of the Trump administration. And, all hell was breaking loose here. There's still people trying to, impeachment still sort of up in the air. We don't know what's going on with Russiagate. There's all kinds of bombshell revelations coming out, usually not backed by much evidence. But it is a very chaotic time. And at the same time, the Department of Justice is still staffed, except for the Attorney General. It's still staffed by people from the Obama administration. So it's just an iffy time. Also in April, people probably remember this. Mike Pompeo is now the CIA director, and he gives an extremely hostile speech where he says that WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service. And I don't think anyone has ever described them with those words before. And it leaks out that the DOJ is considering, charges against Assange. We don't know what was going on in the background, or whether it was a result of the negotiations falling through, whether they thought they were going to be able to stop the Vault 7 releases altogether, or, what else may have been going on. We really don't know. But it starts getting the heat is on WikiLeaks a lot more at this point. And the Washington Post publishes an op-ed written by Julian Assange, where he pushes back on that description of WikiLeaks as an intelligence service, and he, reasserts that is a publishing, it's a media, it's a publishing outfit. And then we don't hear much else about this, or sorry, we don't even know that this negotiations were going on at the time. But in my timeline, I don't see any other relevant activities that related to this until months later, when Dana Rohrabacher starts to try to negotiate with Julian Assange, and he tries to get information. He meets with Assange in August of 2017, and now he's trying to be a go-between the Trump administration and Assange.
Well, I believe that he said it's not even that he was trying to be a go-between. He from what he said, and if we believe what he said, he seems to have been given some type of indication of evidence that, and the other thing to keep in mind here is that what Dana Rohrabacher was doing was not anything to do with Vault 7. It was all about proving that Russia had nothing to do with WikiLeaks publication of the DNC emails and the Podesta emails, etc. And so he wasn't a go-between in the sense that he was never able to actually meet with Trump. He tried to, but it seems that this was not so much a negotiation of, like, for example, WikiLeaks saying, well, we have proof and maybe we'll give it to you if you do something for us. It seemed much more like Rohrabacher had seen the information and would have been able to give it to Trump if he had been able to see Trump himself. That didn't happen, and therefore it went nowhere. And so I think that it's similar in some ways, but it's also very different because it's not relating to Vault 7, and it's similar. It's similar in the sense that the fact that it was the Vault 7 sort of negotiations were shut down for reasons that were not to do specifically with Vault 7, in the sense of Comey probably shutting it down to stop proof that Russiagate was bogus and the whole Russian hacking narrative was bogus from coming out. And I think it's a shame too, because when you talk about the fact that Pompeo called WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service, in actuality, not only are they a journalistic organization, but the CIA should have been thanking them, because what WikiLeaks did was it showed them that a very dangerous set of tools were floating around in outside of the CIA, that their security had obviously been breached, and it was a way of telling them, you guys have failed in your duty to protect yourselves. And so they should have been literally thanking WikiLeaks, not only for letting them know about the security breach, but also for not publishing the weaponized versions of that malware. So the fact that they basically had such bruised egos that they couldn't handle it, and basically then retaliated instead of being mature enough to say, hey, this is actually in a way a helpful release in the sense of not being in the hands of terrorists, or the fact that we now know that it could be because it was outside our, it was obviously accessed in an insecure way. This lets us know that that information could be in the hands of terrorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that their response was not, okay, let's take this on board, let's move forward, it was to retaliate, shows the immaturity of the CIA and the attitude that they have.
Yeah, well, from their point of view, they obviously they don't see this as maybe they do see it as well, this could have been worse kind of thing, but I think maybe what they're implying by saying it's a hostile intelligence agency is that if it was a friendly intelligence agency, they would have, notified them that these tools were out there in the wild. And
but isn't that exactly what WikiLeaks was doing through these negotiations? Was saying we have this, and wasn't the fact? I mean, I think that the CIA would only consider. Not WikiLeaks first is not an intelligence agency, but even if, like, pretending in a parallel universe that they were, the only type of intelligence agency the CIA would think is friendly would be one that they have control over. So I don't think it's I don't think it's WikiLeaks's responsibility, the actions and the retaliation type of response from the CIA. I think that's just the CIA's way of dealing with things that they don't have control over.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is, I think this is the first time that WikiLeaks has released CIA information. Is that true?
To my knowledge, yeah, directly. CIA. I know. Obviously, they released a huge trove of United States cables, but I believe that's under the purview of the State Department. So yes, I think this was the first direct CIA information that they'd published, to my knowledge.
Yeah. So the CIA has never lashed out quite like this on WikiLeaks before, as far as I know. But as soon as it's something that damages them, yeah, they go all out. Yeah, I mean, maybe because I'm so interested in the Russiagate story, I assume that Assange he sees an opportunity he sees the new president coming in, who has indicated that he might be more sympathetic to WikiLeaks. He knows he has the Vault 7 documents, and he needs some kind of an immunity deal. He needs to, some relief from his situation. And it looks to me like he uses Vault 7 as leverage, but that the information on the DNC leak, hack, I'll say leak or hack, because even though I think it was a leak, I'll just say leak or hack because it's not settled law yet. But that's the way I frame it in my mind, and I realize that maybe it really was Vault 7 was the number one thing, and the Russiagate aspect of it was not. But
No,
it
I
just,
absolutely think that's involved. I'm just saying that, like for example, when you brought up Rohrabacher, that specifically was to do with Russiagate, and so that there are definitely different factions that are affected by all these different scandals for sure.
yeah,
And I think Russiagate is a major, major part of that. And I think that maybe, and this is me speculating, but I think one of the things that may have happened when we talk about the fact that Comey maybe, interfered with these Vault 7 negotiations because of Russiagate, I think it's really interesting to kind of zoom out even further and take a really massive, bird's eye view and think about the fact that it's not just, Comey's FBI, who we know was very close with CrowdStrike and who, didn't even bother to ask to see the DNC servers. You also have their role. So, they're obviously very, very much a part of the DNC leak story, but they're also very, very, very much involved in this whole Russia collusion story. And when you zoom
exactly.
out and you see the fact that you have the FBI, the CIA, and MI6 involved with basically falsifying evidence of the Trump campaign's collusion with Russia, actually, falsifying that evidence together from across the pond, proverbially. It's such a massive operation just on that side of it that I can imagine why so much, why Comey was so quick to step in when it came to sue, because that was only 6 months before, summer 2016, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have January, March, April 2017. I cannot imagine that Comey wasn't paranoid about anything coming out concretely that would kind of debunk all of the evidence that they had falsified at that point. So
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the reason why I'm focusing on this article makes it a sort of a secondary aspect, that Julian Assange offered technical evidence
yeah,
that Russia did. But I put that first as the number one, thing going on with this. And that's why I included Dana Rohrabacher in this
yeah,
timeline. And
definitely.
so this is another path for Assange to make some kind of improve his situation in some way, and to refute the allegations that he worked with Russia and all of this stuff. So I saw it as related. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the fact that WikiLeaks was still careful about the way they released the Vault 7 stuff, it makes me think maybe they still thought there was a chance of
Or
coming to some kind of an agreement.
or maybe that's just that's pretty much the way they've gone about their business for a very long time. People accuse them falsely of endangering people or publishing things recklessly, and that's not what they do. I think that's just their work ethic. I think they're very responsible in the way that they publish this type of information, whether it's cables, whether it's CIA, malware, etc. I think that they've had a good, can you imagine the effort it takes to go through thousands upon thousands and basically millions of documents to redact what needs to be redacted to make sure people stay safe?
No, I
That must
can't.
be an absolutely massive endeavor. So the fact that they do that is, I think, testament to their good faith, that they are not trying to, that it really shows them as a responsible journalistic publishing outlet as opposed to any sort of remotely, a hostile intelligence service. So
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. Well, let's continue on this timeline anyway, whether it's related to the Vault 7 things or not. We have Rohrabacher meeting with Assange, in London in August of 2017. At this point, it does look more like an effort to exonerate, just just sort of uh, refute this whole narrative that Russia hacked the DNC, and then Russia gave the emails to Julian Assange, and that all part of this larger collusion plot, which is raging at this moment in time, in real time. And he's working with a conservative journalist, Charles Johnson, who I think actually arranged the meeting. I'm not familiar with this particular guy. Rohrabacher himself is acting as an envoy. He's going to get this information from Assange and he's going to bring it back to Trump. But he comes back and he can't get through to Trump. And this goes on for a number of months. And it's sometime in September, I assume Rohrabacher leaks the fact that he has tried to contact Trump's administration. He's tried to get through to Trump via his chief of staff, John Kelly. I think they catch somebody asks Trump this, like when he's walking into the White House or on the tarmac or something, and Trump indicates that he has never heard about the call, the Rohrabacher's attempt to get to Trump through John Kelly. So John Kelly, if Trump's telling the truth here, then John Kelly never even told him about the call. And
I think given the amount of press that especially his Rohrabacher's late attempts, like when he met with Kelly, I believe that was publicized pretty widely. So I doubt that he completely didn't know, but that may have been his poker face surrounding it. I'm not sure.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah, it doesn't seem likely that he knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
Because he's following all the Russiagate stories pretty closely. You can see that from his tweets. So Rohrabacher keeps trying, and he's not successful, and I think to this day still has not gotten through from what we're being told. He's never been able to relay this information to the Trump administration or Trump himself. However, in October, Bill Binney meets with Mike Pompeo on Trump's orders because Binney has information, and Elizabeth's news organization is tied into this because I believe you guys were the first ones to report on the forensicator analysis that
Yes.
argues. Yeah.
We were the first ones to report that on the findings of the forensicator. And we also, prior to that, we had been one of I think the only publication that had reported on the work of another analyst, Adam Carter. I think that both of those analysts' work has been incredible, considering the fact that they have never. This is not their job. This is something they're having to do on their own time for free. And so I think that both of them are heroic. Then neither of them, they aren't getting personal, under their real name. They are whatever it is. They are not getting sort of like ego credit either. So I think that they have been absolute heroes in all of this, and we were honored to report on them. And I think that independent journalists like and comedian Jimmy Dore has said often, it's like it doesn't take much to be a good journalist, because all you have to do is point out the glaring truth, and then you're a good journalist. And I think that's how I feel about the forensicator and Adam Carter's work. If journalism as it should be was operating in America, Disability Media would never have been the first people to report on this. There would have been multiple different outlets reporting on them immediately, and we would not be the first ones to do it. The only reason that we have been first in all of this is because we're the only ones that want to report the truth on this subject. And I don't mean, there are other independent outlets as well which do a great job, and they're also reporting on that. But as far as the mainstream outlets go, none of them want to hear this story. And the only time that they did report on it, as far as the forensicator's work, was when Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or VIPS, published a memorandum to Trump which cited both the forensicator's work and our first report on it. And then that memorandum was then reported on by The Nation. Patrick Lawrence published a wonderful article on it, and that then triggered a lot of mainstream coverage, which then led to pushback, of course, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's a huge shame that more journalists in the sort of mainstream sense of the term are not reporting on this information. We are not. I'm trying to say that we are not some sort of brilliant, team of people. We're just normal people who report the truth, and the fact that it's taken us to do that is a shame. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, and I've heard Jimmy Dore make this argument too, that it's this void that has created the opportunity for him, and that's the reason why he's growing. And the same is true, of others who are, diligently picking up on these things. And frankly, it's shocking that the media, the mainstream media, given the fact that they pick up on every tiny detail of Trump, and yet they leave these giant things unreported. They don't pay attention to them, or they just sort of wave them off as conspiracy theory. Same old thing. But Bill Binney does get involved with this. And Bill Binney's, well known for people who don't know him. He's a former NSA technical director, and he has been active in the same organization that Elizabeth just mentioned, the VIPS, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, that you'll hear from Ray McGovern. He's not the official spokesperson, but generally he's the one we hear from related to this organization. But Trump does hear about Bill Binney's sort of argument, and he apparently orders Mike Pompeo to meet with Binney and then to relay that information to him. And that happens. That does happen, and it happens in October of 2017. And the other thing I should mention is that Wikileaks, their verified Twitter account, on the day that the Solomon article was published, that we're talking about here, the Hill article revealing that Comey scuttled the immunity deal with Julian Assange. WikiLeaks did acknowledge that. They said, quote, "They can confirm the accuracy of the Hill report on Comey. However, it should be noted that the immunity/safe passage was limited to covering the talks." So they actually answer that question that was left earlier. We talked about when Laufman and Waldman were talking about clarifying the safe passage. So WikiLeaks, comes through and says the safe passage was only for Assange to travel to some place to meet with U.S. officials. So, and that's pretty much all we know on it. But there's been some speculation on why this happened, because you have to wonder, why did Comey shut this down? What were his interests? What did he consider the highest priorities? If it was such a dangerous potential thing for these Vault 7 documents to be released, he thought that was less of a risk than finding out what Julian Assange's side of the story is with Russiagate and the DNC emails. I mean, that just seems wildly out of whack to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why did he shut it down? What would be his reason? And we do hear from Ray McGovern in Consortium News. He has an article, and he says, did Senator Warner and James Comey collude on Russiagate? He clearly thinks. I've also heard an interview with him. He just gave a brand new one with Scott Horton. He alludes to the same thing that you were talking about, Elizabeth, that this is part of a much bigger story where high-level intelligence community leaders were involved in Russiagate, intended to spy on the Trump administration, perhaps undermine his campaign or his presidency. And that, if Assange told the world, or if the information got to Trump, how the DNC emails and the Podesta emails really got to WikiLeaks, or if he helped them rule out the underlying theme to Russiagate, that it was Russia, then that was a risk to them. Maybe their role in this would be exposed or something along those lines, without getting too much into the speculation. But I have to say that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Definitely. I think that there is actually, I don't think you have to get into speculation too much to discuss that, because actually the evidence really does indicate, whether it's in the quote hacking end of the Russiagate fairy tale, or whether it's in the Trump-Russia collusion end of the fairy tale, all of those theories actually have far less evidence behind them, backing them, than the opposite interpretation of actual evidence. And that's what Vips was so great at talking about and discussing. That's what the Forensicator provided us. But I do want to clarify very quickly about what the evidence was that was discussed by the Forensicator and then picked up on by Vips in that specific part of the DNC hacking story or DNC leak story. What the Forensicator was discussing was the NGP van files that were published by the online persona Goose for Two. And so when the Forensicator concluded in their analysis that those files were accessed locally, it did not have any implication for the actual files that WikiLeaks ended up publishing, because all he was analyzing were files that were published by Goose for Two. And Goose for Two was at that time supposed to be the quote Russian hacker. That's what the legacy press, up until the Forensicator basically debunked this, the legacy press ran with this story for months, that the Goose for Two was this Romanian / whatever Eastern European hacker that acted on behalf of Russia. and breached the DNC servers, and then that's how WikiLeaks got this information. So by debunking Goose2 as some sort of Romanian Russian hacker, or Russian Kremlin-backed, state-backed hacker, that debunked the legacy press hacking story. But what it doesn't do is comment in any way whatsoever on the actual information that WikiLeaks published, because if you look at it from this perspective of simply looking at the facts, Goose2 would have been publishing information from a separate, probably a separate source in order to preemptively smear WikiLeaks. So when we say Goose2 accessed, or whoever is behind the Goose2 persona accessed this information locally, where we are saying that the person, the persona that the legacy press is saying was a hacker did not hack. We are not saying anything. It has no relevance to WikiLeaks, because we very much believe that this was not WikiLeaks source. Does that make sense? So that's why it's really important in not just undermining, but in basically debunking the legacy press's version of this DNC hack story. But I think it's just important to remember, because when people responded to it, often their line was, "Oh my God, they've proven that it was Seth Rich. Oh my God, this is, it was a leak, not a hack." And I believe that WikiLeaks did receive their information as a result of a leak. But the problem is that the forensicators' findings actually have nothing to do with that. And
with those files, because
when they say it's a leak, that would be like assuming that Goose2 had gotten his files from Seth Rich, and that actually was a story that we covered very, very early in our coverage of Adam Carter's work. What Adam Carter pointed out so deftly and so perceptively was that the Goose2 persona had actually tried to seed that idea. That, well, if for example, what Adam Carter identified was that it seemed to be that whoever was behind the Goose2 persona not only was trying to present themselves as a Russian hacker, but was also preparing for WikiLeaks to come out with to evidence that the information given to them was through a leak. So what did they do? At the same time they tried to present themselves as a hacker, they also put information out into the public through the private messages on Twitter with Robin Young, an actress, and I believe a porn star or something, but basically telling her in a private message conversation on Twitter that Seth Rich had passed them the information. So they completely contradicted themselves. But what they were trying to do is identify Seth Rich as a source to them as well as to WikiLeaks. Do you see what I'm saying? So they were trying to bind themselves to whatever the source of WikiLeaks might be in order to smear that. To then say, like, let's say WikiLeaks presents evidence of how this information got to them and it's not a hack. Well, then they'd be able to say, oh yes, but the Russians were somehow involved with Seth Rich. So, right. Or whatever. And so that's really, really important to understand, because what it says is not that it's not saying that we have evidence that Seth Rich or anyone else leaked to WikiLeaks. It's saying that there seems to be this operation in attempt very, very much to smear WikiLeaks and preemptively smear them as associated with Russia in whatever way possible. So
to make the connection between a Russian hacker and WikiLeaks, in other words.
Yes. Whether it was through, as the press kept saying, through breaching the DNC networks, or whether they had to then shift the narrative again and just simply identify Goose2 with whoever leaked to WikiLeaks. It definitely seemed that it was, its specific intent seems to have been to smear WikiLeaks. And I'm sorry to go on in such a long-winded way about that, but the reason it's important is because I have seen so many people respond to that coverage, whether it's right when it was published or months and months later when Bill Binney speaks about it, and their gut reaction is, this is proof it was a leak, not a hack. And that is really, really an incorrect understanding of what's being spoken about. And so that's why I wanted to really lay that out very carefully. And because earlier you asked me about, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe you asked me what kind of the current situation is with, information from the forensicator and his analysis. The reason that I bring this up again is because even the latest analysis from the forensicator and Adam Carter on all of these subjects require people to understand that really important point about what it is that they're studying, where those files are from, and how they are separate from WikiLeaks.
And they're talking about the files, the Guccifer 2. The only thing that Guccifer 2 published, he published to the DC Leaks website, right?
Yeah, he published the NGP van files. He published a Clinton Foundation file, I believe, and he published, what was it? I believe the very first one, the first document that he published was the Trump Opposition Report, which was really, and that's that's the subject of one of the forensicator's latest findings. And it's very interesting because it actually turns out that file came from an attachment in one of the Podesta emails.
Yeah.
So it's a complete mess. So basically, but the reason that I started going on this giant rant is because you said, well, not to get into too much speculation. I just wanted to really say that although it's complicated and although people have often misinterpreted the evidence as presented by people like Adam Carter and the Forensicator, there is a bucket load, a truckload of information and evidence that does not require we speculate. The only speculation required is when either you misunderstand the evidence or when you are talking about the Russian hacking fantasy or the Trump-Russia collusion fantasy, because those things are the speculation. It's just been speculated by the press instead of a layperson.
And everything tends to get lumped into one, like as if it was one big bundle of files, when really there's a number of different things. There are the DNC emails that came out in July. There are the Podesta emails that came out in September or October.
Yeah.
And then there are the Guccifer 2, the things that Guccifer 2 put out. And but people tend to report on it as if it was just one big hack and one big leak, and it really wasn't.
Absolutely. And I think that the farther out we get from these events, a lot of people in our latest reporting on the Forensicator's analysis kind of responded with, oh, I wish this had been published earlier, or, oh, this is Guccifer 2 is kind of a stale story now. And I think that's understandable, but it's also important that we report on this later on, because now we're also understanding aspects of the Trump-Russia collusion narrative that we didn't understand a year ago, that have still been evolving. And we're able to have a much larger bird's eye view of the actors and the moving pieces of these situations, and identify that there are shared aspects of the Trump-Russia collusion narrative in the false sense of the term that go back to some of the same actors in the Russian hacking fantasy story
narrative, right?
So both of those narratives go back to the FBI. They both go back to CrowdStrike. They both go back to the same people that have ties to the Hillary Clinton campaign. So it's really, really interesting to see the facts line up in that way a year or two later. And you wouldn't get that bird's eye view just 1 month after it happened.
Right, that's true. That's very true. And that whole story needs to be, I did look into it in some detail early on, but I haven't followed where Adam and Forensicator have taken it since then. I'd love to I'll need to do some studying in my own part first, but I'd actually like to do a whole episode on that too. And then, you have the things like the Cy Hirsch phone call,
Absolutely
thrown in to it. He didn't deny that phone call was, he didn't deny that it was authentic. He threw out some, it's just gossip, threw some sand on it. And then very recently, it may have been just last week, I don't know if you heard his interview with Jeremy Scahill on the Intercepted podcast. And again, he just says like this didn't happen the way it's being reported. So he says there's no intelligence to prove that the Russians, again, he's lumping it all together into one too, which makes it a little confusing. But he says that Russiagate it's not what they're saying. Here's a short clip of Cy Hirsch and Jeremy Scahill in the Intercepted podcast from June 27th, 2018. And I'm adding this after the fact just for the benefit of our audience with Elizabeth's approval. So here it is.
You were very critical of the way that the broader news media was reporting on the so-called Trump-Russia affair. Has your assessment changed at all, and is that a legit story?
Wow, you go right to it, don't you? Let's just start with this premise. After 9/11, before we invaded Iraq, we were told by the American intelligence community that they had high confidence. That phrase was said again and again, that Saddam Hussein had WMDs. They're saying now the same thing about Russia. I have been reporting something, I've been watching something since 2011 in Libya, when we had a Secretary of State that later ran for president. And I will tell you, some stories take a long time. And I don't know quite how to package it. I don't know how much to say about it. I will assure you that there's no known intelligence that Russia impacted, cut into the DNC Podesta emails. That did not happen. I can say that.
I think you can take it from him. Like, what that adds to this whole perception of the fact that what the legacy press is telling us, that is the speculation, not the facts on the ground. It doesn't line up with reality. And so that's why it doesn't take anybody brilliant to report on these facts. It just takes you actually reporting on the facts as they exist, rather than the way that they're being presented by the mainstream media.
Right. Which I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I still am, because I think there are still some good journalists out there. I don't know if they're thoroughly confused or they are intimidated, but the whole Russiagate narrative, there are a lot of people and some very powerful people working very hard to keep this all together, because there are so many people that have a stake in it. And that ranges all the way from, the players, the people who are involved in these investigations and everything, all the way to, the defense contractors who benefit from a more hostile relationship with Russia and with, as some admirals recently said, and Mattis himself said too, things have changed. We're now in great power competition. And you could just see that they're happy to have a big, competent enemy again, instead of, jihadists. And
well, I think that's what's so interesting, though, is that Russia is not Cold War. It's not the Soviet Union in the Cold War. It's not that. It's really, its GDP is tiny compared to the US. I think it's a figment of their collective imagination that this is some sort of great power that they're going up against. And you see that is where that's coming from directly when you have Christopher Steele, who was working at the Russia desk in MI6 and was in Moscow for a period of time. So their paycheck comes from being in a Cold War or a hot war or whatever, any type of conflict with Russia. So I think that the idea that they are just impartial agents just passing on, presenting this honestly, is absolutely laughable. I mean, we would never accept that level of conflict of interest if it was in a different area of life. We would never say, oh, well, you're profiting from this conflict or the presentation of a conflict, so therefore what you tell us is right about this. Much less when it has as little evidence to back it as the dossier or any other part of this has backing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you just sat and listed all the different conflicts of interest in this, I mean, it's like one big conflict of interest. And to swing this all the way back around to our original purpose for this podcast, that's what makes everyone so skeptical about why Comey shut down these investigations. And makes me even more suspicious that there's something there to this whole, how the DNC and the Podesta and all the different information made its way to WikiLeaks. I seriously doubt it's the way that we've been told.
Absolutely. And I think that the only thing saving the Comeys of this world from having to face the actual facts of this story is the fact that the legacy press outlets have collectively agreed to cover their eyes and their ears and not report the actual facts of these cases. So that has that's given a buffer between the Comeys and the Gianni Patellas and the Mifsuds and all of these individuals who are part of this larger story, to kind of not have the contradictory evidence talked about. But I hope and I think that at some point it's going to reach a breaking point where legacy press can no longer pretend to be blind and mute and deaf to these facts. I think that at some point it's going to be impossible for them to deny it. And when that actually happens, it will be a watershed moment, because it will be unavoidable to see how much they have lied in the interest of the establishment that pay them, honestly. Because you were mentioning earlier, or we were discussing earlier, the fact that, these people are journalists. It's their job to report facts. It's their job to report on these stories. And when you think about it, and I think Jimmy Dore has done a fantastic job talking about this, the fact is that these people, and actually H.A. Goodman has done a good job of terming these people as rightfully they should be called PR firms instead of news outlets. They are literally owned by just a few corporations. The control of those outlets is in the hands of a very few people. And so they are basically paid not to report facts, but to report narratives that their bosses think is appropriate. And that generally goes along with the interests of the unelected power structure in the United States and especially the military interests. So I think that what this shows is not just that, people like Comey are corrupt. We know that, but it also shows the way in which the press has gotten to such a point. They are essentially an arm of the state. They are not a check and balance on the state anymore. So that is something that once people really understand the depth of their lies in this sense, they will understand that who they're actually, working for. And it's not the people. It's not in the interest of truth. Because if it was, they would be all over defending organizations like Wikileaks who give us the unfiltered truth.
Yeah, that's one of the big unintended consequences of this Russiagate, all the things that it's bringing down or are certainly bringing down a confidence level of the people, for sure. There are a few sort of bulldogs on this whole thing, and they're very partisan. I don't know if it's loyalty to Trump or if it's partisanship, or I think there's some genuine, just wanting to get, anger and wanting to get to the bottom of this. Basically, they're in the House. They're Republicans in the House. And Devin Nunes is the head of the House Intelligence Committee. But there are also some other guys. There's, of course, Trey Gowdy. And there's this guy, Jim Jordan, I think it is. Yeah, Jim Jordan is on the House Judiciary Committee. And I did find a clip where The Hill they have a video news service as well. And they did interview him, and they asked him about this story, the John Solomon story. And because these guys are the logical ones to pursue this, because, to me, it seems completely logical that they should have Comey under oath in front of a committee asking about this, right? I mean, this is a big thing. Wouldn't you think they'd be doing that? And I just want to play for you real quick what he said. It's just like a minute and a half quote.
Absolutely.
We just had this big story break all today. We were talking to John Solomon, our executive vice president.
He's broke a lot of big stories.
Yes, we got a big story here today. But you have some names that appear here that are involved in the decision, it seems, not to go forward with this offer of DOJ. Specifically, Mark Warner pops up and also Comey. Are you thinking, is the House thinking about trying to get them to appear or to get more information on this decision?
Good question, but too early to tell. I'm intrigued by the story. I mean, once again, James Comey jumps in the middle of this. It looks like they were moving and progressing and maybe going to get a chance to talk to Mr. Assange and figure out what he had and what he planned on releasing and how that may impact our intelligence capabilities. And then James Comey steps in. It looks like he and Senator Warner and stop it. So we'd sort of like to know why. But, we're in the middle of some big things this week. We're, for the first time, going to have Peter Strzok in front of us. So we'll see. I think it's an interesting story. I'm intrigued by it, and I think others will be as well.
Does it strike you as particularly strange that Mark Warner, a Democrat senator on the Intelligence Committee, would be involved in this kind of decision-making?
Well, we knew he was talking with these folks before. I mean, there was a story a while back, and maybe in John's as well. So I guess I'm not shocked because I had read a little bit about this, but the idea that they were thinking about talking with Assange and Mr. Warner's in the middle of that, I think that's pretty big information. So again, we'll just have to wait and see.
So he doesn't. It was a little disappointing. I was hoping he was going to go right after it, but I don't think he is. I don't think he's ahead of any committee. I can look that up real quick, but I guess it's good that he was aware of it and he said he was intrigued by it. So hopefully somebody's going to go after this.
And one thing that's interesting, returning to this John Solomon piece, it's interesting that they actually published this as an opinion piece when Solomon is a celebrated investigative journalist, and this is anything but an opinion piece. And I can't take credit for that observation. A lot of people have noticed that, and I've seen them talk about it, the fact that it's very odd that The Hill published it there. But I think that what that speaks to is the way that it's a necessary buffer for The Hill protecting themselves from the information that they're publishing about this, and the way that, and that then speaks to the reaction you see in that interview you just played, where even Republicans are really not interested in going after these actors. And I think that speaks to the corruption that is on both sides of the aisle. This is not something, and I think if that wasn't the case, you would definitely, unquestionably, you would see Trump going after the people that are part of this entire false story and the real collusion, which has happened between the FBI, CIA, MI6, CrowdStrike, and all these other actors as part of the DNC hack false story and the Trump-Russia collusion story. Why is it that we don't see Trump coming out and addressing the facts that completely debunk Mueller's entire premise for his special investigation of all of this? I just, it's absolutely mind-boggling that his team has not come out on that. And so I think that the hesitancy that you see with the Republicans is unfortunately because they're part of the same system and the same, quote, swamp that the Democrats are. And I think that's just how people have to wake up to that this isn't a partisan swamp we're looking at. It's a very bipartisan, corrupt institution, a number of institutions, and corrupt press on both the conservative and democratic type sides. There isn't one side that's corrupt and one side that isn't.
Yeah, and I think they're weighing their concerns about completely undermining these institutions that they've been propping up. If we were to find out what really happened, perhaps, we might find out how really corrupt they are.
Well, and I think, here's another example of this too that just happened today. As that on the day that we're having this actual discussion, I believe Joanne was just entered his plea deal with the DOJ. And the reason I bring that up, even though it's not directly related to what we've been speaking about, it shows you the level of corruption in terms of the DOJ's plea deal, because this is not Hillary Clinton's Department of Justice. This is Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice. This is Trump's Department of Justice, and they are cutting this deal with Joanne. So the fact that you'd see that instead of going after them for everything that they're worth and exposing the corruption of people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that shows you how much this is not about Democrats or Republicans. This is about the entire system itself. And fundamentally, that system is not elected. And that's why it doesn't matter who's in power, it stays corrupt and it stays in power. So I think that people have not really grasped that yet. And I think that when they do, that's when there will be a possibility of actual change, because people have to get beyond the point of getting their favorite team, their favorite color into the White House or into Congress, because they have to understand that it doesn't matter. It's the same corruption either way. And that's what people don't want to realize.
Yeah, I'm totally down with that. There are some people pulling at these threads. We may get to a point where, like you said, the media can't deny it. The officials themselves can't deny it. They can certainly try to do damage control or just sort of limit the amount of information that they're willing to investigate, that they're willing to report. But I don't know. This thing looks to be so big. I don't know how they're going to do that. It's already...
Well, what it seems to be, and when I watched the kind of the legacy press response to what the Forensicator published in the summer of 2017, what I noticed was, instead of addressing it, when it becomes unavoidable, what they do is they deflect to another story. They simply pick up another part of the fake narrative they want to spin, and they try to distract and deflect over to that, rather than addressing the facts that have been brought up. So whether it's when it comes to the Trump-Russia collusion narrative being completely debunked, I would bet that what they will do is they will try to bring up some aspect, a new fake aspect of the Russian hacking story, or they will try to create an entirely new narrative that, again, will be based on no facts, but will give them something to focus on in the press to avoid and to distract from the facts that have been presented.
Yeah, I agree. And it wouldn't surprise me if some anonymous leak comes up with another reason why Comey did this,
Exactly.
Takes
Yes.
it off on another tangent. But I guess we'll see. It's pretty interesting stuff. And Elizabeth, I'm keeping you for too long here, so I should probably start to wrap this up. So is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
Just the fact that I know I said this earlier, but I'll just say it one more time, is that the next Unity 4J vigil will be from the 6th of July to the 8th. And we are going to have a lot more amazing, we have had stellar guests every single vigil, from Reconnect Julian all the way through Unity 4J. But I know that there will be some amazing new guests that have not appeared on these vigils before. And I know that Susie's doing a fantastic job organizing that right now. So I just wanted to remind people that that's going to be happening basically this coming weekend at the time that we're speaking. And I would implore people, no matter what the current news cycle is telling us about these negotiations with WikiLeaks being scuttled by Comey, or the DNC leak/hacking narrative, or the Trump-Russia collusion narrative, no matter what, please remember and support WikiLeaks, and remember and support Julian Assange, because he's suffering, and we are the only voice that will be there to protect him. He has nobody in establishment media batting for him. So we are his only defense, period. And so whatever you can do it. It doesn't have to be donating financially, but you can donate to IamWikiLeaks.org, and you can also go to justiceforassange.com, but that's justice, the word, and then the number 4, and then Assange.com, and both of those sites you can donate. You can also buy from the WikiLeaks shop. But if you have, everyone is financially strapped right now, so there are lots and lots of other ways that you can help. And so whatever you can do it. You can also write to Julian Assange, and on our last vigil, John Kiriakou, who was a CIA whistleblower, and Kieran O'Reilly, who is an incredible human rights activist, who have both been imprisoned themselves, talked about the importance of postcards and letters in keeping their tether to humanity, that link to the outside world, and it helped save them from suicidal thoughts and from the worst of the depression, from being isolated. So we have to write to Julian Assange, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever you can do it. And that, I just wanted to say that, because honestly, if we don't say this and if we don't get that out there, no one will. And it's not good enough for someone who has given so much of their lives and their freedoms for us, for our ability to know the truth. So he deserves our support for that. And so that's what I'd like to say.
And I will link these things in the show notes for people who didn't catch the links. Also, watch for the hashtag Unity4J. You should see it all over Twitter, but it'll be in my Twitter feed for sure. So this is going to be over this weekend. That'll be the weekend following 4th of July.
Yeah, it will be. It should be from Saturday. I believe it's Saturday. It depends, because the way that we organize this, we're considering time zones all around the world, so that it can be a day off in like New Zealand. So basically, from the Saturday coming up from when we're actually speaking through to late Sunday, should be the vigil. So I appreciate everyone who's listening and checks that out. And just supports in whatever the way they can. You don't have to, if you're busy on the weekend or you work nights or whatever, you don't have to watch the vigil. I mean, you can do whatever you can do to support is life-saving and necessary. So
yeah, particularly this time, just a really precarious time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thanks again, and I hope to talk to you again sometime about this. And thanks for the work that you're doing and for spending the time here with us.
Not a problem. I'm happy that I was able to speak to you, and thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Take care, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. And that's our show. Thank you for listening. A special thanks to Elizabeth Lea Vos. You can find her on Twitter at Elizabeth Lea Vos, and you can find her work at disobedientmedia.com. We are independent media. We rely on your contributions. This podcast was brought to you with the help of our generous donors. You can pitch in by going to patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or by doing a one-time donation using the links on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast channels at iTunes, other podcast apps. On YouTube, it helps a lot if you hit the subscribe button. That's free. Subscribe to the channel, and also use the thumbs up icon to like the videos. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.